An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everyone who might be viewing this Dharma talk now or in the future. We will continue our examination of the Bodhisattva heart. We've got them on the table and we're gazing at the Bodhisattva heart. And a quick refresher that this series of talks, however many, I don't know yet, but the series of talks is structured on the tripartite form of Shantideva's aspirational prayer for bodhicitta. With the wish to free all beings, I will always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until the attainment of full awakening. That was the refuge portion which we talked about last Dharma talk. And we're going to go into the middle section, inspired by camp compassion and wisdom. Today, in the Buddha's presence, I generate the precious bodhicitta for the benefit of all beings. And there's a talk where I address that phrase, in the Buddha's presence, at length. The whole talk was about that a month ago, I think. And the last verse, which is for later, is, for as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. The Dalai Lama's favorite prayer, and a prayer that I've been using for decades when I do prostrations. And it's on the Facebook page. You'll have to scroll down a bit to find it, but I posted it some time ago on the Facebook page of Shantideva's prayer. So we're now embarking upon the heart of the matter, pun intended, bodhicitta, the heart of the bodhisattva. That word chitta or chitta, I've heard it pronounced both ways. I by myself pronounce it both ways sometimes. Briefly, and that'll be for a future talk to look at that word more closely, but briefly it can mean heart or mind. And so bodhicitta is the heart of awakening, the mind of awakening. And that's, we're going to begin looking at bodhicitta specifically. And not this morning, but in future talks, we'll look at the Mahayana tradition, how it has practices for cultivating or arousing bodhicitta. But today, this is a more general introduction to the idea, the essence, and it will entail a commentary on a poem of Naomi Shihab Nye, Kindness. But before I get into that, I want to briefly mention what bodhicitta is. You know, a little thumbnail sketch. It's, when we talk about its unconditional nature, its vastness, it can sound really abstract, abstruse, and, you know, not having much to do with life. But that's not true. Pema Chodron likes to use, when she's introducing bodhicitta, she talks about our basic human capacity for empathy. Like, and she uses the example of when you see a dog that's been hit by a car and they're you know, in misery dying on the side of the road, you naturally feel pain. You know, it just spontaneously arises. You can't, for most of us, unless we're, you know, dyed-in-the-wool sociopaths, we cannot help but feel something when we see that. Eva and I were driving back to Green Gulch one night, and a deer had been hit on the road. and we could see its chest cavity rapidly expanding and contracting. It had not died yet. It was dying. It was in bad shape. And it was, the memory of that is still pretty vivid. I can almost see it in Technicolor. The pain of seeing that. Pema Chodron introduces that as of the same nature as bodhicitta, of the same nature. It arises spontaneously. We don't have to will ourselves into it. We don't have to argue to feel that empathy, that pain, when we see the animal in distress, in death throes on the road. It happens to us in a sense, but it's also not separate from us. It's part of our nature. It's a glimmer of bodhicitta, a little glimmer of bodhicitta, because it comes up spontaneously. It's of the same substance, in quotation marks, it's of the same substance as bodhicitta. It is, in a sense, it's an instant of bodhicitta, because we don't will it, it comes up spontaneously. And of course, we have a grand capacity for suppressing our innate ability to feel empathy and compassion. You see a homeless person, in full degradation and despair, sitting on the sidewalk. And most of us, I would venture to say, feel less sympathy for the homeless person than we would for a dog that's dying on the side of the road. Why is that? We have reasons. Well, if they really wanted to, they could do something with themselves. They just love the drugs, or they don't want to be housed. They like the freedom of homelessness. I've heard, working with the homeless, I've heard justifications and rationalizations such as these, which I believe, rightly or wrongly, I believe are defense mechanisms to evade the pain of recognizing the degradation, the normalization of despair that hypothetical person is in the midst of. A non-hypothetical person that I worked with, when I was working with the homeless, Jim Ferguson. Jim has passed, but he was a Vietnam vet, living on the streets, addicted to alcohol. That was mainly, he was prejudiced against those who used crack, but he spent a lot of time drinking the alcohol. And we would invite him in to talk to groups that were staying with us. We would sometimes have high school or college students stay with us for a week or so, and serve in the soup kitchen. And we would often ask Jim to come and talk to the groups. And one time in particular, trigger warning, you're going to hear some scatological terminology here. One time in particular, he was talking to students, and he was encouraging them, stay in school, get your education, take good care of yourself. Don't end up like me. I'm a piece of shit. That's the trigger warning, POS. And as he veered into that comparison, his voice started to crack, and he started to, get more emotional. So, the amount of pain and hopelessness and despair that's just become normalized for a homeless person is hard to bear. It's hard to gaze upon. Much easier to say, why don't they just lift themselves up by their own bootstraps, or something of that nature, which is ironic, because I found out recently that phraseology used to be an ironic description of the impossibility of somebody in some situations to actually help themselves, because it's not it's a violation of the laws of physics to lift yourself up by bootstraps, but it morphed into an accusatory use, the very same phraseology went from ironic to literal. They should lift themselves up by their own bootstraps, but I digress. The point being that the simple capacity to feel empathy and compassion that arises spontaneously for most every human being is of the same nature as the vast heart of the Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva. So it's not something that we need to acquire. It's basically something that we need to arouse and uncover. But it comes with a price. The Bodhisattva, I wrote down this morning, is the one who endeavors to notice this innate capacity for empathy and compassion, to notice it, to cultivate, to arouse it, to cultivate it, and to expand it limitlessly. This basic human capacity. It's at once very, very simple and profoundly vast. But it's usually, the opportunity is usually missed. But it is frequently presenting opportunity. That's the introductory point I wanted to make. That is, at the same time, it's very simple, very basic thing in human nature. This ouch, when we see that spontaneously arises in the midst of suffering. And at the same time, it is our deepest nature that has profound, wondrous, limitless capacities innate in it. So now we're going to begin to look at Naomi Shihab Nye's poem, Kindness. And I found a podcast on Being where Krista Tippett interviews Liz Shihab Nye. And she says that this is the only poem that was given to her, fully formed, other poems that, she's been inspired and then she's worked out the poems, but this one just kind of appeared to her. It was given to her, is the verbiage she used. And it happened when she and her husband were on vacation in Mexico and they were robbed. And, they were in Mexico and all their resources were gone. They had nothing or virtually nothing. And her husband was going to some other place in Mexico to try to reactivate traveler's checks so they'd have some resources. So he had to leave her in Mexico, in this part of Mexico. And during this trip, the poem refers to things that actually occurred to her personally. But the poem, is beyond her personal biography and opens up to something else. So first I'll just read the poem in its entirety, and then I'll go back, and forgive me for using my telephone for this. Then I'll go back and give commentary to it. Okay, kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. How he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows. And you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you've been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. So there's the poem, and now the commentary. Glancing at my notes with various points I'd like to make. Okay, starts off, before you know what kindness really is. Now, you know that bodhicitta is not something foreign. It pops up. If we're not psychopaths, it pops up. You know, things will happen and we will feel compassion. We will feel empathy. We will feel personal pain, seeing the arising of pain. And that's going to happen. But what is that really? Is it just something that happens and then we get on with our day and try to avoid that, find rationalizations to prevent us from feeling it very often? Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so that you can know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. So the bad news is that to understand what bodhicitta is, you got to lose things. You got to experience suffering. You got to feel the desolateness of that sometimes is endemic to human life. That's the bad news. The good news is you're going to. It's going to happen, You're going to lose a tooth. You're going to lose a friendship. You're going to lose your parents. They will die. Your loved ones will die. You will die. So the good news is it's, ultimately unavoidable. Our elaborate stratagems will ultimately fail. But to really know what kindness is, we have to embrace that aspect of human life. That suffering is woven into the very fabric of space and time, as Norman said, that I quoted some time ago. Make that part of our hood. Part of our domain is the fact of suffering. And somehow seize that inevitability as not a curse but an opportunity. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. How desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. Feel the callous indifference of the world. It'll present itself. And we can just respond with nihilistic resignation and despair, or we can use that as a way to elucidate kindness, contrast kindness with that. How you ride and ride thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out their window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness. When we aspire to arouse bodhicitta, and we look upon moments of compassion and kindness and moments of sorrow as opportunities rather than happenstance occurrences that might be pleasant or unpleasant, we start to be pulled towards bodhicitta, pulled towards a fuller realization of bodhicitta. It starts, kindness in the most desolate of settings has a alluring, compelling quality to it when we start to arouse bodhicitta. And we start to have more resources for love and compassion than we thought we had. So, but before you can learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel to where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road, which is something that Naomi Shihab and I actually saw on her vacation, and so it ended up in the poem. You must see how this could be you. You must see how the grandmother in Ukraine has lost her grandchildren, that could be you. You must feel that as not something other than your own life, your own pain. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, as a glimmer of Buddha nature, a glimmer of limitless bodhicitta, before you can know these inevitable encounters with kindness as a window to the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing inside. They're actually two sides of one coin. They're actually one thing. And if we're unwilling to cognize the full extent of the sorrowful conditions of samsara, of this human conundrum that we're in, which we see evidence of every day, but we use the better parts of our minds to shield our heart from the full pain of it. As long as we're doing that, we won't realize that simple kindness is a precious jewel emanating from the deepest source of our being. So, in order to know kindness, before you know kindness, that's the deepest thing inside. You must know sorrow, that's the deepest thing inside. You must wake up with sorrow. Wake up in this world with all of the anxiety and sorrow and pain that occurs every day. Wake up with the fullness of the pain of this world. Yeah, I know it sounds gruesome, and it has a gruesome aspect. It's not a pretend thing. It has to be a deep, committed heart thing. You want to be present to the suffering of the world. That's your vow. That's immense. You know, turn on the news, that's immense. But in order to know kindness, in order to arouse bodhicitta fully, in order to know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must live that. That you must walk with all beings, including those who have lost their children to violence today, right now, maybe. You must speak to it. Till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows. And you see the size of the cloth. So yeah, there is definitely a daunting aspect to the cultivation of bodhicitta. It entails this, and it ain't easy, I know. But then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. And it's only kindness that makes sense anymore. Getting to that stage. I was listening to a podcast of a scholar, a translator of Dzogchen texts, being interviewed by Wisdom Publications podcast. And he made a statement, and I need to search back for this podcast. It says, when you look around, what you're really seeing is compassion. You may not know it, but actually what you're really seeing is compassion when you look around. You look around at Zafu's, a tea kettle, Nate. What you're really seeing is compassion. And that struck me because that's true. That is true. What does that mean? Well, that could be a whole series of talks in itself. But real quickly, the Heart Sutra says form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. That which is form is emptiness. That which is emptiness form. The same is true of everything. Then it goes on later to say, O Shariputra, all dharmas are marked by emptiness. Dharmas are phenomena. The teacup, the Zafu, Nate. Phenomenal experience is marked by emptiness. In their arise, I like to say that whatever arises in its arising is Buddha. Before fabrication, before elaboration, before conceptual thinking tries to peg it down into something, it's just Dharmakaya. It's just Buddha arising. Hence, we can say that when you look around, what you're actually seeing is compassion, is Buddha. There is a way to cultivate that way of seeing. For my own practice, I use a mantra from the Lotus Sutra, Eyes of Compassion, observing sentient beings assembles an ocean of blessings beyond measure. To try to remember that out beyond my ideas of good and bad, there is this field, to quote Rumi, where what arises is Buddha, where what arises is love, is compassion. In its raw, unfabricated, unelaborated, not tainted by conceptual labeling, in its actual own being. It's empty, which means it's love. So that's when it's only kindness that makes sense anymore. So the work is gruesome, opening to the full suffering of all sentient beings. Sounds trite when you put it into words, but as a practice, it's got a gruesome aspect. We renounce the distancing function of rationalizations and feel what's actually there. The depth of despair and hopelessness that the guy smoking the crack pipe is in the midst of. the truth of the violence and cruelty that occurs always. It has that gruesome quality, but if we're steadfast in our commitment to awaken the limitless heart of love, bodhicitta, then it's only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that ties your shoes. What kind of sense does that make? But that's an interesting image. Only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you off into the day to look at bread. Wrong bookmark. When you do something, this is Suzuki Roshi, branching streams flow in the darkness. When you do something with a purpose based on some evaluation of what is useful or useless, good or bad, more or less valuable, your understanding is not perfect. If you do things that need to be done regardless of whether the results are good or bad, successful or unsuccessful, that is the real practice. And here's the kicker, the summation. If you do things not because of Buddha or truth or yourself or others, but for the things themselves, that is the true way. So that's an expression of kindness. You don't do it for anything other than it. That's basic Zen. You just, when sweeping the floor, you sweep the floor, because the floor is compassion and you're grateful and you want to reciprocate the kindness of the floor. But that's all just words. But you're actually just sweeping the floor. And you're embodying the reciprocity of compassion when you just sweep the floor. It's only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you off into the day to look at bread. There's a story that Dogen relates, I'm not sure which fascicle, but a story about a monk, and he's in the kitchen stirring the soup with a paddle. As he's stirring the soup with a paddle, Manjushri Bodhisattva appears above the soup pot. What does this monk do? He takes the paddle and hits him. Another monk, seeing this, says, "What'd you do that for?" Manjushri Bodhisattva, he's like the glorious Bodhisattva of wisdom, and most Zendos have him as a central image on the altar. But this monk just, had this vision of Manjushri Bodhisattva appear above the soup pot, and he took the paddle and hit him. And the monk, was kind of surprised by that. And this monk said, "Well, if that old fart Shakyamuni appeared, I'd hit him too." I don't know if he used the expression old fart, but the Chinese equivalent of that. He's trying to take care of the soup, man. This soup is already Buddha. Manjushri above the soup pot is a diversion from the reciprocal kindness of just stirring the soup. Everything is Manjushri Bodhisattva already. Everything is compassion already in its raw arising, just as it is. If you really know what kindness is, you don't need manifestations of Manjushri Bodhisattva. The taste of your tea is ultimate reality. The sound of wet pavement is love, is compassion. That's the fruit of this rather rigorous journey. Okay, then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. When in order to recap a little bit, in order to realize kindness, bodhicitta as the deepest thing inside. You must know sorrow as the other deepest thing inside. You know, same cloth, same thing, in a sense. Two sides of the same coin of compassion. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you've been looking for. Hey, you found me. Cool. Let's go for a walk. I'll be with you like a shadow or a friend. Commentary on that. A Sangha. The Sangha was an Indian monk who had some issues with institutional Buddhism, monastic Buddhism. And so he left the monastery and found a cave and said, I'm gonna find the true Dharma. This is a recurrent theme in Buddhism of monastics getting disillusioned with institutional Buddhism and going off on their own. It happened to Dogen. He came to China for a similar reason. Anyway, back to Asanga. So he finds this cave and he says, well, I'm going to practice Maitreya Puja. I want to have a vision of Maitreya. I want to, get in touch with Maitreya Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of love. And so he gets in the cave and he meditates for years. No realization, no vision of Maitreya. And he gets discouraged and he decides to give up. And so he leaves the cave and he encounters this guy who takes the Indian equivalent of rebar, I guess, an iron bar, and a silk cloth, and is rubbing rubbing the silk cloth against the rebar. And Asanga says, "What the heck are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm making sewing needles." "Oh, that must take an awfully long time. That's kind of ridiculous." "Well, look at this stack of sewing needles I got over here." So if you don't mind, I'm going to get back to work. And so Asanga says, "Geez, such dedication, such patience, such resolution. Maybe I should go back and try some more." So he goes back. And similar cases like this, forgive me, I didn't look it up to get the details of each encounter, but similar encounters. Several times he tries for years, gets discouraged, leaves, and encounters somebody else doing something, like maybe trying to wear away a rock with a feather, maybe, I'm not sure, but something similar several times. But finally, after several attempts, he gets thoroughly disgusted and figures that he's not who he thought he was. He's not some special yogi that has a mission to restore Buddhism in its authentic sense to the world. He's actually a fraud, a faker, and a hypocrite. And he's just totally discouraged with himself. Total failure. He thinks, I've been fooling myself all along. So in this state of utter dejection, he walks along and he sees this dog. And this dog is half eaten by maggots, and it's in enormous pain, rotting by the side of the road. And the Sangha sees that dog and says, well, I really blew it as a Buddhist practitioner. Maybe I can try to ease the suffering of this poor animal a little bit, and my life won't be a complete waste. And so the story goes, that he bends down, cuts off a piece of his own flesh to set the maggots on so that they'll have something to eat. And so then he goes down and he starts to pull out a maggot, and the dog yelps with pain. It's hurting him. The fingers reaching for the maggots is causing the dog enormous pain. And so he says, well, maybe I can be more careful with my tongue. And so he decides to use his tongue to extract the maggots from the dog. And this is the story, folks. Kind of gross, I know, but this is the story. And so he goes down, extends his tongue, and just as the tongue is about to touch the maggot, the dog transforms into Maitreya Bodhisattva before Asanga's eyes. And first, Asanga is, paying obeisance and say, "Oh, thank you, Lord, for showing up," and all that, bowing. But then he says, "But where were you, man? Jeez, I spent decades, it feels like, in that cave, earnestly trying to see you, And so, what's up with that? And Maitreya Bodhisattva says to him, I've been with you all along. It's just, your pride, your egoic clinging to being a great siddha, a great yogi, and having a vision of me to realize the true Dharma was obscuring your vision. But now that you've been humbled a little bit, and an act of simple, pure kindness motivated you to ease the suffering of another, then your eyes were clear enough to see me. I've been here all the time. So Asanga was humbled. He was no longer thinking of himself as a worthy vessel of the Dharma. And in that state of humility was prompted by a simple act of kindness, which revealed to him Manjushri Bodhisattva, Maitreya Bodhisattva. And it's only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of this suffering world to say, it's I you've been looking for. I've been here all along, but actual kindness, simple, selfless kindness, opened your eyes. And you can see me now. Kindness that raises its head from your confusion, from this world of confusion, raises its head from the crowd to say, it's only kindness that raises its head from the crowd to say, here I am, you've been looking for me, it's I you've been looking for. And then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. So that's pretty much today's talk. My intent in today's talk was to use something contemporary to illustrate that bodhicitta is the most sacred term in Mahayana. In a sense, more sacred than Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, because that's where Buddha, Dharma, Sangha arises from, bodhicitta. It's something very simple and basic to the human, to us. And we're liable to encounter it relatively, I wouldn't say frequently, but on occasion we're liable to encounter this spontaneously arising impulse to kindness. It's not something that we will choose, reason ourselves into, or will. We'll be caught by kindness. We see an injured animal suffering, and only the psychopath, sociopath, only them is liable not to feel kindness in that occasion. It's so basically human. And at the same time, it's got limitlessness at its root. It's the deepest thing. It's the most human thing. To be a human being is to be really, truly, fully human is to be Buddha. It's not to transform ourselves into some other kind of creature. It's to recognize our nature, to remove the obscurations to our nature and rejoice in this precious human life, in the jewel of limitless compassion, which is present anywhere we look. This is the culmination of the path of the Bodhisattva. It's got some gruesome territories to traverse, but those gruesome territories can be a catalyst to love. And that's the safest way to bear the territories we must traverse. So in future talks, I'll get more into the traditional literature about what bodhicitta is and how it's aroused and cultivated. There's numerous categories of teachings on bodhicitta, and so we'll probably spend a few sessions at least going into that. But hopefully this will give you a feel for it, that it's not something foreign. It's not something obscure. It's something you're liable to encounter a glimmer of in just your everyday life, unless you're unfortunately a sociopath and that's totally brought offline that basic human capacity for empathy. But that basic human capacity for empathy, which will be triggered at some point, is a doorway. And if you gaze through that doorway, you may be emboldened to step a little bit in, open up a little bit more, and see Avalokiteshvara pick your head up from above the crowd, say, hey, thanks, appreciate the help. And then you'll be emboldened to go further, open up further. It's a rather rigorous, daunting, and sometimes gruesome path, but I really feel it's the only path that brings true peace of heart. Anything else is a compromise, and we're being duplicitous, and we know it someplace, and we're never at rest. This path is provocative of being able to actually rest within your own heart, because it's open and clear. And so I hope I can encourage you to embark upon and continue this journey with me into the vast wonder of the Bodhisattva heart as we continue next time. Thank you very much. May our intention equally extend to every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.